Wears jumpsuit, sensible shoes, uses husband's last name. By Deborah Tannen from June 20th, 1993. Some years ago, I was at a small working conference of 4 women and 8 men. Instead of concentrating on the discussion, I found myself looking at the 3 other women at the table, thinking how each had a different style and how each style was coherent. One woman had dark brown hair in a classic style, a cross between Cleopatra and plain Jane. The severity of her straight hair was softened by wavy bangs and ends that turned under. Because she was beautiful, the effect was more Cleopatra than plain. The second woman was older, full of dignity and composure. Her hair was cut in a fashionable style that left her with only one eye, thanks to the side part that let a curtain of hair fall across half of her face. As she looked down to read her prepared paper, the hair robbed her of bifocal vision and created a barrier between her and the listeners. The third woman's hair was wild, a frosted blonde avalanche falling over and beyond her shoulders. When she spoke, she frequently tossed her head, calling attention to her hair and away from her lecture. Then there was makeup. The first woman wore facial cover that made her skin smooth and pale, a black line under each eye, and mascara that darkened already dark lashes. The second wore only a light gloss on her lips and a hint of shadow on her eyes. The third had blue bands under her eyes, dark blue shadow, mascara, bright red lipstick and rouge. Her fingernails flashed red. I considered the clothes each woman had worn during the 3 days of the conference. In the first case, man-tailored suits in primary colors with solid color blouses. In the second, casual but stylish black t-shirts, a floppy collarless jacket and baggy slacks or a skirt in neutral colors. The third wore a sexy jumpsuit, tight, sleeveless jersey, and tight yellow slacks, a dress with gaping armholes and an indulged tendency to fall off one shoulder. Shoes? Number 1 wore string sandals with medium heels. Number 2, sensible, comfortable walking shoes. Number 3, pumps with spike heels. You can fill in the jewelry, scarves, shawls, sweaters, or lack of them. As I amused myself finding coherence in these styles, I suddenly wondered why I was scrutinizing only the women. I scanned the 8 men at the table, and then I knew why I wasn't studying them. The men's styles were unmarked. The term marked is a staple of linguistic theory. It refers to the way language alters the base meaning of a word by adding a linguistic particle that has no meaning on its own. The unmarked form of a word carries the meaning that goes without saying, what you think of when you're not thinking anything special. The unmarked tense of verbs in English is the present. For example, visit. To indicate past, you mark the verb by adding ed to yield visited. For future, you add a word, will visit. Nouns are presumed to be singular until marked for plural, typically by adding s or es, so visit becomes visits and dish becomes dishes. The unmarked forms of most English words also convey male. Being male is the unmarked case. Endings like ess andette mark words as female. Unfortunately, they also tend to mark them for frivolousness. Would you feel safe in trusting your life to a doctorette? Alfre Woodard, who was an Oscar nominee for Best Supporting Actress, says she identifies herself as an actor because actresses worry about eyelashes and cellulite, and women who are actors worry about the characters we are playing. Gender markers pick up extra meaning that reflect common associations with the female gender, not quite serious, often sexual. Each of the women at the conference had to make decisions about hair, clothing, makeup, and accessories, and each decision carried meaning. Every style available to us was marked. The men in our group had made decisions too, but the range from which they chose was incomparably narrower. Men can choose styles that are marked, but they don't have to, and in this group, none did. Unlike the women, they had the option of being unmarked. Take the men's hairstyles. There was no marine crew cut or oily longish hair falling into eyes, no asymmetrical two-tiered construction to swirl over a bald top. One man was unabashedly bald, the others had hair of standard length parted on one side in natural shades of brown or gray or graying. Their hair obstructed no views, left little to toss and push back or run fingers through, and, consequently, needed and attracted no attention. A few men had beards. In a business setting, beards might be marked. In this academic gathering, they weren't. There could have been a cowboy shirt with a string tie, or a 3-piece suit, or a necklaced hippie in jeans. But there wasn't. All 8 men wore brown or blue slacks and nondescript shirts of light colors. No man wore sandals or boots. Their shoes were dark, closed, comfortable, and flat. In short, unmarked. Although no man wore makeup, you couldn't say the men didn't wear makeup in the sense that you could say a woman didn't wear makeup. For men, no makeup is unmarked. I asked myself what style we women could have adopted that would have been unmarked like the men's. The answer was none. There is no unmarked woman. There is no woman's hairstyle that can be called standard, that says nothing about her. The range of women's hairstyles is staggering, but a woman whose hair has no particular style is perceived as not caring about how she looks, which can disqualify her for many positions and will subtly diminish her as a person in the eyes of some. Women must choose between attractive shoes and comfortable shoes. When our group made an unexpected trek, the women who wore flat, laced shoes arrived first. Last to arrive was the woman in spike heels, shoes in hand, and a handful of men around her. If a woman's clothing is tight or revealing, in other words, sexy, it sends a message, an intended one of wanting to be attractive, but also a possibly unintended one of availability. If her clothes are not sexy, that too sends a message, lent meaning by the knowledge that they could have been. There are thousands of cosmetic products from which women can choose and a myriad of ways of applying them. Yet no makeup at all is anything but unmarked. Some men see it as a hostile refusal to please them. Women can't even fill out a form without telling stories about themselves. Most forms give 4 titles to choose from. MR, Mr., carries no meaning other than the respondent is male. But a woman who checks MRS or Miss communicates not only whether she has been married, but also whether she has conservative tastes in forms of address, and probably other conservative values as well. Checking MS declines to let on about marriage. Checking MR declines nothing since nothing was asked. But it also marks her as either liberated or rebellious, depending on the observer's attitudes and assumptions. I sometimes try to duck these variously marked choices by giving my title as Doctor, DR, and in doing so risk marking myself as either uppity, hence sarcastic responses like "excuse me," or an overachiever, hence reactions of congratulatory surprise like "good for you." All married women's surnames are marked. If a woman takes her husband's name, she announces to the world that she is married and has traditional values. To some, it will indicate that she is less herself, more identified by her husband's identity. If she does not take her husband's name, this too is marked, seen as worthy of comment. She has done something. She has kept her own name. A man is never said to have kept his own name, because it never occurs to anyone that he might have given it up. For him, using his own name is unmarked. A married woman who wants to have her cake and eat it too may use her surname plus his, with or without a hyphen. But this too announces her marital status and often results in a tongue-tying string. In a list, Harvey O'Donovan, Jonathan Feldman, Stephanie Woodbury McGillicuddy. The woman's multiple name stands out. It is marked. I have never been inclined toward biological explanations of gender differences in language, but I was intrigued to see Ralph Fasold bringing biological phenomena to bear on the question of linguistic marking in his book, The Sociolinguistics of Language. Fasold stresses that language and culture are particularly unfair in treating women as the marked case because biologically it is the male that is marked. While 2 X chromosomes make a female, 2 Y chromosomes make nothing. Like the linguistic markers S, ES, or ESS, the Y chromosome doesn't mean anything unless it is attached to a root form, an X chromosome. Developing this idea elsewhere, Fasold points out that girls are born with fully female bodies, while boys are born with modified female bodies. He invites men who doubt this to lift up their shirts and contemplate why they have nipples. In his book, Fasold notes a wide range of facts which demonstrate that female is the unmarked sex. For example, he observes that there are a few species that produce only females, like the whiptail lizard. Thanks to parthenogenesis, they have no trouble having as many daughters as they like. There are no species, however, that produce only males. This is no surprise, since any such species would become extinct in its first generation. Fasold is also intrigued by species that produce individuals not involved in reproduction, like honeybees and leafcutter ants. Reproduction is handled by the queen and a relatively few males. The workers are sterile females. Since they do not reproduce, Fasold says, There's no reason for them to be one sex or the other, so they default, so to speak, to female. Fasold ends his discussion of these matters by pointing out that if language reflected biology, grammar books would direct us to use she to include males and females and he only for specifically male reference. But they don't. They tell us that he means he or she, and that she is used only if the referent is specifically female. This use of he as the sex-indefinite pronoun is an innovation introduced into English by grammarians in the 18th and 19th centuries, according to Peter Mulhauser and WetForHer in Pronouns and People. From at least about 1500, the correct sex-indefinite pronoun was they, as it still is in casual spoken English. In other words, the female was declared by grammarians to be the marked case. Writing this article may mark me not as a writer, not as a linguist, not as an analyst of human behavior, but as a feminist, which will have positive or negative, but in any case powerful, connotations for the readers. Yet I doubt that anyone reading Ralph Fasold's book would put that label on him. I discovered the markedness inherent in the very topic of gender after writing a book on differences in conversational style based on geographical region, ethnicity, class, age, and gender. When I was interviewed, the vast majority of journalists wanted to talk about the differences between men and women. While I thought I was simply describing what I observed, something I had learned to do as a researcher, merely mentioning women and men marked me as a feminist for some. When I wrote a book devoted to gender differences in ways of speaking, I sent the manuscript to 5 male colleagues, asking them to alert me to any interpretation, phrasing, or wording that might seem unfairly negative toward men. Even so, when the book came out, I encountered responses like that of the television talk show host who, after interviewing me, turned to the audience and asked if they thought I was male bashing. Leaping upon a poor fellow who affably nodded in agreement, she made him stand and asked, "Did what she said accurately describe you?" "Oh yes," he answered, "that's me exactly." "And what she said about women, does that sound like your wife?" "Oh yes," he responded, "that's her exactly." "Then why do you think she's male bashing?" He answered with disarming honesty, "Because she's a woman and she's saying things about men." To say anything about women and men without marking oneself as either feminist or anti-feminist, male basher or apologist for men seems as impossible for a woman as trying to get dressed in the morning without inviting interpretations of her character. Sitting at the conference table musing on these matters, I felt sad to think that we women didn't have the freedom to be unmarked that the men sitting next to us had. Some days you just want to get dressed and go about your business, but if you're a woman, you can't, because there is no unmarked woman.